Beneath the silver gaze of the full moon, in the stillness where sand meets stone, the Sphinx watches, not as a statue, not as ruin, but as a sentinel, eternal, patient, and utterly silent. Her lips do not move, yet she speaks, not with voice, but with riddles echoing across time. Her eyes, worn by sandstorms, yet sharp with wisdom, seem to see into every soul that dares approach. She has seen empires rise and fall, pharaohs crowned and buried, truths lost beneath centuries of dust and denial. And when you listen, truly listen, she whispers. Dance like the flame, wild and untamed. Sing like the nymph, with joy that defies gravity. Run like Hermes, never looking back. Move forward, always forward. These are not commands, they are keys. Each movement, each sound, each step, an answer waiting to unlock what lies beyond. For those who seek with open hearts, for those who ask not what is the Sphinx, but who am I in her shadow. The Sphinx is not stone, she is a portal, a threshold between worlds, between knowing and not knowing, between myth and memory. Her riddle is not meant to be solved, but lived. She doesn't demand answers, she invites transformation. And so the wind shifts, carrying your breath, your fear, your hope through chambers hidden beneath her paws. What lies within? Not gold, not maps, but echoes of you, ancient, infinite, and unfinished. When you walk away, you are not the same. Because those who truly face the Sphinx do not return with knowledge. They return with purpose. Know thyself, whispered the oracle of Delphi. Carved into marble, spoken into myth, a command, a caution, a compass. Etched above the entrance to Apollo's sacred temple, a message not just for priests and kings, but for all who dare to look inward. And the Sphinx? She echoes it back, not in words, but in silence, in stillness, in stone. She does not speak. She waits. Not to tell you who you are, but to ask if you're ready to find out. Her mystery is not locked in riddles, but in reflection. The seeker who kneels before her sees not a monster, not a guardian, but themselves. For the Sphinx is the mirror of the soul. Her gaze pierces beyond titles, past stories, beneath masks. She sees what you hide, not to judge, but to reveal. In her shadow, the questions rise. Who are you beneath the noise? What part of you do you fear to face? What truth lies buried beneath layers of time and ego? The ancient Greeks feared her riddle. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening? But the answer was always the same: man. Born crawling, walking, then leaning on a cane. A puzzle of stages, a reminder that to live is to change. That to be human is to be many things at once: strong, weak, curious, broken, becoming. And still, the Sphinx waits. Not as a gatekeeper to a tomb, but as a threshold to the self. If you seek truth, she shows it. If you seek greatness, she tests it. If you seek freedom, she dismantles the illusion. Her silence is not emptiness, it is invitation. To stand still long enough to hear your own heartbeat. To face your fears without flinching. To walk toward your unknown with open eyes. She does not guard treasure, she guards transformation. In her stillness you are stripped bare, not humiliated, but purified. For who are you when no one is watching? Who are you in the dark, when the sand blows and the stars are cold and indifferent? The Sphinx watches, always has. Through empires and earthquakes, through silence and song, through conquest and forgetting. And still she waits, not for answers, but for courage. Because the great secret is this: the Sphinx is not asking you to solve her. She is asking you to see her. And in doing so, to finally truly see yourself. In the sun-baked sands of Abydos, where shadows stretch long across temple ruins, a priest kneels, not to worship, not to chant ancient words, but to listen, to feel. His hands press into the warm earth, grains sifting through his fingers like the passing of time. He does not call out to the gods. He opens himself instead, to the sorrow carried in the wind, to the grief etched in forgotten stones, to the stillness of suffering left behind by the centuries. This moment is not ritual, it is remembrance, a communion not with gods, but with humanity, and in that sacred stillness something stirs. Not a voice, not a vision, but compassion. Not the kind born of glory or power, but of vulnerability. It blooms slowly, like a delicate flower unfolding in the heat of the desert. Fragile, soft, and yet utterly real. The priest does not seek to fix or to judge, but simply to hold space for pain, for imperfection, for the broken stories carried by those who came before. Compassion, in its purest form, is not strength as the world defines it. It is gentleness. It is allowing another's sorrow to touch you, and not turning away. Here, in the ruins of Abydos, once a center of Osirian devotion, the priest embodies the deeper meaning of healing, not through miracles, but through presence. He does not need to speak. The silence is enough. The dust carries memories, and he honors them not with words, but with his stillness. To feel is to know. To kneel is to yield. In this quiet act, compassion reveals its paradox. It is both the softest thing and the most enduring. It asks for nothing, and yet it gives everything. The priest does not rise with answers. He rises with understanding. And in that, the spirit of Abydos lives on, not in stone, not in ceremony, but in the quiet courage of one who dared to feel. For 2 days, the narrow pass of Thermopylae echoed with the clash of bronze and the cries of battle. The Persian forces, vast as the sea, crashed against the Greek line again, and again they were repelled. The Spartans and their allies held firm, their discipline like stone, their courage like fire. Behind their shields, they made a wall of willpower unyielding, immovable. But even the strongest wall may be undone from behind. In a quiet corner of the Persian camp, a man stepped forward. A Greek. His name was Ephialtes, and history would curse it forever. Driven by fear, ambition, or perhaps the hope of Persian reward, Ephialtes revealed a secret, a hidden mountain path that curled behind the cliffs, around the hot gates, a path known only to local shepherds and few others, a path that led directly behind the Greek position. Xerxes, frustrated by 2 days of losses, seized the chance. Under cover of darkness, he dispatched his elite immortals, his finest troops, to climb that path. The march was silent, torches dimmed. Only the sound of sandals on rock, the breath of warriors moving like shadows through pine and mist. At dawn, the Greeks learned the truth. A desperate scout or a retreating ally brought word to Leonidas. The enemy was behind them now. Their position was no longer a pass, but a trap. There was no panic, only grim resolve. Leonidas gathered his commanders, and a terrible decision was made. Most of the allied contingents, those from Thebes, Corinth, Phocis, were dismissed. Sent home, not out of cowardice but to survive, to fight another day, to carry news of what would come next. Leonidas remained, with his 300 Spartans and a few hundred Thespians and Thebans who chose to stay. They knew death awaited them. And still they chose it. The betrayal had turned the tide. But it had not broken their spirit. If anything, it had made their purpose clearer. They were not defending a past now. They were defending an ideal. The hot gates would become their tomb, but also their altar. And in the morning light, as the Persian forces closed in from both sides, the Greeks prepared for the final act. No retreat. No surrender. Just the silence of men who had already said goodbye. Dawn broke with a crimson sky, as if the heavens themselves sensed what was to come. The Spartans stood in silence, their armor gleaming dully beneath the rising sun. Around them, the remaining Thespians and Thebans prepared for death, not with despair, but with quiet defiance. Leonidas, the Spartan king, had made his choice. He would not run. He would not yield. This narrow pass Thermopylae would be his battlefield, his grave, and his legacy. Behind him, the path to Greece stood open. But the Persians would pay dearly for every step they took forward. The air grew tense as the Persians surged in from both sides, fresh troops, endless ranks. Arrows darkened the sky, and the earth quaked beneath thousands of marching feet. But the Greeks did not waver. Shoulder to shoulder, they formed a phalanx one final time. Shields interlocked, spears poised. Heartbeats synchronized in purpose. The first Persian wave crashed into the wall of shields and broke. Time and again, the Greeks held firm. They fought with the precision of warriors born for this moment. Spartans moved with lethal grace, cutting through enemy ranks with cold efficiency. The Thespians fought with passion and fury, refusing to let their stand go unnoticed. Yet the tide could not be held forever. As weapons splintered and shields shattered, the Greeks fought on with swords. When swords broke, they used daggers. And when steel failed them altogether, they fought with fists, stones, teeth, and rage. The battlefield became a frenzy of smoke, blood, and sand. Leonidas, struck by arrows and spears, finally fell, but even in death, his presence anchored. His men, they formed a tight ring around his body, fighting not to win, but to protect their fallen king. It was no longer war, it was ritual, it was sacrifice. The Persians, stunned by the ferocity of the resistance, began to press harder. The final Greeks were pushed back to a small hill, surrounded on all sides. There, they made their last stand. No reinforcements would come, no miracle would arrive. Only the certainty of death, and the choice to face it with honor. And as the final blow was struck, as the dust settled over the dead, silence returned to the hot gates. But the silence was not emptiness, it was remembrance. The last stand had ended, but its echo was only beginning. The sun had climbed high, casting long shadows over the fallen. Dust swirled around the broken weapons, mingling with blood. The hill where the last Greek stood was now a mound of sacrifice, a place where flesh had defied empire and silence. Replaced strategy. The Persians, having finally overwhelmed the last defenders, approached cautiously. They expected fear. They found defiance even in death. The body of King Leonidas lay at the center of the hill, surrounded by the lifeless forms of his warriors. Each had fallen facing the enemy. Not one had turned their back. Some say the Spartans died gloriously. But glory is not gleaming armor or fanfare. It is resolve. It is choosing to hold the line, even when no one is watching, even when you know. The end is certain. The Thespians, too, shared in that glory. Farmers, artisans, ordinary men, who stayed not out of duty, but out of love for their land. They could have fled. But they stayed, and they died with the Spartans. When the fighting ended, Xerxes ordered the mutilation of Leonidas' body, an attempt to erase the myth before it could begin. But the Persians misunderstood something profound. A body can be broken. Bones can be burned. But an idea, a symbol, cannot be killed. The death of the 300 did not demoralize Greece. It ignited it. Word of their sacrifice spread across the land like wildfire. In Sparta, mothers did not weep. They whispered, "He died as he should." In Athens, sailors sharpened their oars, preparing for the coming naval stand at Salamis. The Persian victory at Thermopylae was hollow. They had won the pass, but lost the illusion of invincibility. The Spartans had not just defended Greece, they had defined it. In death, they had become immortal. The dust of battle had settled at Thermopylae, and the Persian banners fluttered in the wind. But something deeper, something unseen was taking root. Across the rocky coasts and inland valleys of Greece, whispers turned to oaths. Oaths turned to action. The defeat was not the end. It was the beginning of a transformation. Thermopylae did not save Greece. It bought time. Time for city-states to rally, for armies to form, for strategy to emerge from despair. Leonidas had not stood alone for nothing. He had stood to remind Greece of who they were. In Athens, men who had once debated philosophy now built triremes. By the hundreds. Their harbor, once a place of commerce, became a war machine. In Sparta, sons of the fallen trained harder, not for glory, but to be worthy of the legacy left behind. They were told not to mourn their fathers, but to earn the right to one day join them. Across Greece, even rival city-states put down their quarrels. Corinth stood beside Thebes. Delphi sent offerings not to the gods, but to the army. The unity Thermopylae inspired was unlike anything before. And it would culminate, months later, in the naval battle of Salamis. There, Athenian ships would outmaneuver the Persian fleet, shattering their hopes of conquest. A year later, at Plataea, Greek, hoplites would stand again, this time with numbers on their side, and drive the invaders from their soil for good. Xerxes had taken the pass, but he never took Greece. And though the names of kings fade, though marble statues crumble, the story of 300 Spartans endures. It endures not because they won, but because they stood when they could have run. Because they chose honor over survival. They turned a hopeless stand into a message for eternity. Freedom is worth dying for. Thermopylae was not just a battle. It was a reckoning between fear and duty, power and defiance, mortality and meaning. The men who stood there did not live to see the outcome of the war, but they knew what their sacrifice would say. Today, where once shields clashed and arrows fell like rain, only silence remains, a sacred silence that humbles even the wind. There, a single inscription stands. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. These are not words of mourning. They are words of fulfillment. The Spartans had no illusion of victory. They were not waiting to be rescued. They were the rescue, buying time with blood, standing firm to light a fire that would spread through every Greek soul. To them, courage was not an absence of fear. It was mastery over it. They knew that every heartbeat spent holding that pass was a heartbeat Greece could use to prepare. And they gave those heartbeats freely. But Thermopylae gave us something. More than military history, it gave us a story. A myth that is true. Proof that a small group, bound by purpose, can challenge the march of empire. That even in death, there can be triumph. The immortality of the 300 doesn't lie in heaven or legend. It lies in memory. In stone. In every generation that stands against oppression and says, "We will not yield." That is why they are remembered. Not because they killed many, not because they held the line, but because they became the line. Every time courage is needed, their story is summoned. Every time sacrifice is weighed, their names are whispered, not just as Spartans, but as symbols of unbreakable resolve. That is the legacy of Thermopylae. That is the meaning of immortality through courage. The story of Thermopylae did not end in fire or silence. It lives on not just in the stones of Greece, but in the soul of every person who dares to say, "Enough. I will stand even if I stand alone." Across centuries and continents, the battle has become more than history. It is a symbol that the human spirit, when fueled by principle, can defy even the mightiest empire. The Persian army marched forward after Thermopylae, yes, but not unchanged. The illusion of invincibility had been pierced. The cracks would widen, and soon, at Salamis and Plataea, those cracks would become collapse. But perhaps the greater victory was not military. It was moral. The world saw that freedom is not the gift of kings, but the right of those willing to fight for it. Leonidas did not die for Sparta alone. He died for the idea that law and liberty are worth more than comfort or breath, that a life spent kneeling is no life at all. His 300 were not chosen because they wished for death. They were chosen because they accepted it, not as surrender, but as defiance. Today, their legacy burns like a beacon in every act of resistance, every cry against tyranny, every clenched fist raised not in anger, but in courage. The pass at Thermopylae is just a place, but what happened there transcends geography and time. In every generation, the hot gates reappear not as stone corridors, but as choices. Will you yield to fear or hold the line? Will you conform to silence or speak when it matters most? That is the eternal flame they lit, a fire not of conquest, but of character. The 300 are gone. Their bones are dust, but what they stood for cannot die.